I get a lot of question about tool maintenance, specifically dressing the ends of punches, chisels, hammers, things like that. So I thought today we'd take just a few minutes and discuss how to dress your tools, what shape they might need to be, and what you look for, when do they need to be dressed. As far as the working end of a tool, and it may be hard to see this, for a punch, this is starting to get mushroomed a little bit. It'll still work, you can still punch with it, but the rounder and softer this gets, softer meaning that the edges are no longer crisp, the more work it's going to be to punch and the harder it'll be to get a clean hole. So we want to take this down and just make this a smooth taper again and straight across the edges so it's got kind of a crisp edge right there. For the struck end, you can see this end is starting to mushroom out. It's not bad yet, but it's probably worth taking the time to go ahead and grind that back. The drift that we've been using in several of our videos is also starting to mushroom, so that needs to be taken care of. And the same thing on this end. Not a big deal, they're pretty easy to take care of. Now for a hammer, you can see this one is mushrooming. Hammers don't do this too badly, they will eventually. This hammer is a little bit soft. It was made out of an unknown steel that I was experimenting with. And it's okay, I can get a lot of work done with it, but the face is all marred up because I drive punches with it, and the punches are actually harder than this hammer because this hammer is so soft. So this face needs to be dressed and cleaned up. The peen's in pretty good shape. Now for an extreme example, and the reason you should dress your tools, this is an old antique punch. It's one I've never used, it's just one I picked up somewhere. I've never needed a punch like that this big. When I punch a hole that big, it's either under the power hammer or something, and this just isn't the right punch for that application. If I had a striker in the shop, I would use punches like this. But you can see how mushroomed over this end is. It's starting to crack down the sides. It should have been dressed hundreds of blows before this, and it's going to take a lot of grinding. You can do this with a file, but you're going to be at it all day. And this may even be worth cutting the last quarter inch off. So the tool's going to end up a lot shorter by the time you're all done with it. There is just no reason to make this any more complicated than it has to be. If your tools aren't too hard, and probably the working end on a punch that's been in hot steel a whole bunch isn't going to be all that hard. This is tempered plenty of times. It's pretty easy to file. Try to keep it round. You don't want to make an oval punch. And this end is pretty easy to file because when you made it, you tempered this back further so it would be soft, right? So after I take the mushrooming out flat, I want to put a little bevel back on there. And that helps prevent the mushrooming the next time. Because this is octagonal steel, I'm just going to turn it around a few times and do the same all the way around. Now the tip, I usually come back and I file that flat. But that'll just take a few minutes to get that punch back in shape. Now, file doesn't always leave a polished, smooth surface. No big deal. It's a blacksmithing tool, not a machinist tool. The exact same thing on the drift pin. Yep, here's the one that needs it. So I don't really need to show that again. Now the hammer, we can do this with a file. It's going to take a little while, a much bigger surface. Might as well get a bigger file. I use this big one so much it's actually wearing out and isn't very sharp anymore. So you got to replace files every now and then. And we will do a video just about files. Now I know I did a video on why I think you should have an angle grinder in your shop. And if you got a non-electric shop, you can get a battery operated angle grinder. This is a great place to use it. hearing protection and your respiratory protection. Now once you got the mushrooming out of there, you've now created some fairly sharp sides. And I don't like sharp corners on a hammer. That's going to chip easier, it's going to mark up your work. The other issue is, what do you want the face to look like? Your face could be perfectly flat or it could be domed. And some people like one, some like the other. Your work will be smoother and better with a flat face and rounded corners than with a domed face that leaves little hollow marks every place you hit. But as your skills get better, you'll like the flat face more. If you're just starting out, you may like very slightly, not ball peen dome, but just very slightly domed. So that is pretty much all you need to do to that. I think I'm going to clean it up with some finer sandpaper. I did all of that with a, let me find the grit, that's a 60 grit flat disc. For a hammer I would go to 220, and if you're doing really fine work, it's worth polishing that to a mirror polish. If you're doing that kind of work, you probably have the skills to do that kind of polishing. I'll put the hammer back in the vise so we can take a look at this thing. This thing is a Makita 1 1/8" belt sander. And the first time I ever saw these was somebody using them for this very purpose, but it comes in handy for some other stuff. It is not a cheap tool, it is a luxury item, so don't go out and buy it just to dress your hammers. But because it has a flat platen, it is much better at creating a nice flat surface on your hammer. So I'll just work with that a little bit and I can get that as flat as I want, and then it's great for doing the sides and getting the rounded edges. Very useful tool for that. Also very useful for a lot of other applications. Then there's this thing. This is a mess. This is more of a restoration project. I'm going to knock that handle out of there before I go any further. Frequently the handles in top tools are not wedged, just so they are easy to come out. That helps both in dressing the tool, and some tools are somewhat directional and you need to take the handle out and turn the tool around, like a half-round chisel for cutting curved cuts. But let's not kid ourselves. This is the tool that's going to get this job done. This punch is in such bad shape that doing this by hand with a file is going to be an hour or more work. If the smith that owned it before me had done his job, I wouldn't have so much work to do. Using a grinder like this can be kind of dangerous. They don't have a lot of guards on them, so be careful. Wear your eye protection. Wear your respiratory protection. Use a dust collector if you got one. That great big belt grinder is really an efficient tool for doing that much grinding. I was quite impressed. It took a lot more stock removal than I thought it might, because some of those cracks went pretty deep. So the sooner you dress your tool before they start to crack like that, the longer your tool will last, because that crack won't go so deep. Well, if there's no crack, obviously it doesn't go so deep. Anyways, these tools are now ready to put back in service. They'll be safe. One of the reasons you dress them is to prevent those cracks, and that keeps you from throwing chips off. When you throw a chip off, you hit a tool with a hammer and a chip flies off. Most of the time it just falls to the ground, it's no big deal. But they can fly off at high speed, and there are a lot of people with little chips in their wrists and their hands, and if it hits you in the eye, it will blind you. That's why you need to always wear your safety glasses, but it's also why you need to maintain your tools. Very important. A file will do the job. Most blacksmithing tools should not be so hard they can't be filed. These are not precision machining tools or cutting tools. They're blacksmithing tools. They tend to be a little bit on the soft side. And in use, they get tempered further and further because they get hot from the hot material, and they tend to get softer and softer. So a file will certainly do the job. It just isn't the fastest. An angle grinder will do the job. It's very effective, and the better you get with an angle grinder, the better a job you'll do. The hard wheels, flap discs of different grits, if you can get down to 220, that's great. I know you can at least get a flap disc to 120. The 220s are a little bit hard to find. But if all else fails, you can wrap a piece of 220 sandpaper around a block of wood and do that last little bit by hand to clean it up if you're worried about the 120 scratch marks. This little belt sander, pretty nice little tool, but it's a splurge. I wouldn't go out and buy one just for dressing your tools. Again, you can do all of this with a file. People ask frequently about overheating these tools when you're dressing them. There is so much mass here, even on that big grinder, if I'm careful, I'm not going to overheat it. Now, I did get this end to turn purple while I was grinding it on that big belt grinder because I was taking off so much material. But this end is supposed to be soft. It's already softer than that to begin with, so that tempering it back to purple, I haven't added any more temper to it. It just is irrelevant as far as I'm concerned. That might be an issue on the struck end, but again, in hot steel, it's going to turn purple when you use it, so the color change in grinding, I wouldn't get too hung up about it. If you just go slow and careful, you can do it. I do my hammers on the belt grinders all the time. You just have to work and be aware of where the handle is. But since you're working on a wheel, the handle should be out of the way. You just have to deal with whether it's going to hit a bucket of water you got under there or something like that. Easy to dress your tools. Dressing your tools does not involve breaking into the kids' room and stealing the clothes from the G.I. Joes and the Barbie dolls. It involves just a little bit of cutting with files or abrasives and cleaning them up and making them safe and more precise to use. The working ends of the punches are going to change shape a little bit. If you're taking it back, it's going to be a little bigger around. If you're working around them this way, it's going to get a little skinnier. If you do both, you might keep it the same size. Over the years, this punch is going to get shorter and shorter from both ends from being dressed. Eventually, I won't want to use it anymore. I have yet to take a punch or a chisel that I started with, it was new to me at some point, or I made, and work it down through dressing it to the point that I thought it was too short. It's going to take a lot. You're not taking that much material off. You might lose a 32nd of an inch, each time, maybe a 16th. It's not a big deal. So that's just a little look at dressing your tools. I hope that helps. I hope that answers the questions that a few people had. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. I'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button. Share the videos with your friends. Take a few moments, watch some of my past videos. A lot of the questions people ask have already been answered, and if you search for Black Bear Forge and the subject you're looking for, there's a good chance you'll find a video that has covered that subject. But if not, feel free to answer the question and ask the question in the comments. I will try to get to your questions. I will try to answer them as soon as I can. In the meantime, do head out to the shop. Be safe. Wear your safety glasses, and we'll see you for the next one.